endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if he didn't make it clear already, just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a four-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the Republic, would never survive another Trump term. And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, I'll give you a quick minute to respond here.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people. Not so graciously. They did bad things or a bad job. I fired them. They never fired one person. They didn't fire anybody having to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people who's were just killed, viciously and violently killed. And I got to know the parents and the family. They didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire him. And you take a guy like Esper. He was no good. I fired him. So he writes a book. Another one writes a book. Because with me, they can write books. With nobody else can they. But they have done such a poor job, and they never fire anybody. Look at the economy. Look at the inflation. They didn't fire any of their economists. They have the same people. That's a good way not to have books written about you. But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far. In fact, I got more votes than any president, sitting president, in history by far.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier, so let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say if things get out of control, you'd have no problem using the U.S. military.
Police, yes.
You also said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah, it is much higher because of them. They allowed criminals, many millions of criminals. They allowed terrorists. They allowed common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country, and they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you. Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down? You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country. And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow. And I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in. And all over the world, crime is down. All over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But Vice
Excuse me,
President
the
Harris,
FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud, just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President Harris.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear, where each person stands on the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support our small businesses, address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly, the American people are exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
Excuse me. Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York. Every one of those cases. And then they say, oh, he's a criminal. They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case. And what happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
President Trump, thank you. A really quick response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people
Vice President
to stop
Harris,
him.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president.
Weaponized, please.
This
is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy with a fake Russia investigation
We do have a lot
that went nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss every one of at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking, because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States, and in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times, is a value that I bring to my work to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increased by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus then on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on long-standing work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name-calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
President Trump, your response?
First of all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Defund the police, she's been against that forever. She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
Don't lie.
She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail. She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. Just to finish, one thing so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before. When they took over, they got rid of it, started getting rid of it, and the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times, 4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if she won the election, the day after that election, they'll go back to destroying our country, and oil will be dead, fossil fuel will be dead, we'll go back to windmills, and we'll go back to solar, where they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out. You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar, but they take 400, 500 acres of desert
President
soil.
Trump, we have a
These
lot
are
of
not good
issues
things
that we
for the
have to get
environment
to.
that
We're
she
out of time.
understands.
Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you. We have an election in just 56 days. And I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar, remember that. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, well, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet. That's because she knows what a bad job they've done. What about those people? When are they going to be prosecuted? When are these people from countries all over the world, not just South America? They're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world. And crime rates are down all over the world because of it.
But let me just
one of those, David, one of those people are going to be prosecuted. One of the people that burned down Minneapolis is going to be prosecuted. Or in Seattle, they went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. One of those people are going to be prosecuted.
But let me just ask
you. You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, you know, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi. But I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died. And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side. Let's remember that when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the president said, the former president said, stand back and stand by. So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say, we don't have to go back. Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you to stand for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome. And be clear on that point. Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking. Let's turn the page on this. Let's not go back. Let's chart a course for the future and not go backwards to the past.
Let me just follow up here.
It was a different term, and it was a term that related to energy because they have destroyed our energy business. That was where bloodbath was. Also, on Charlottesville, that story has been, as you would say, debunked. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Jesse, all of these people, they covered it. If they go an extra sentence, they will see it was perfect. It was debunked in almost every newspaper, but they still bring it up, just like they bring 2025 up. They bring all of this stuff up. I ask you this. You talk about the Capitol. Why are we allowing these millions of people to come through on the southern border? How come she's not doing anything? And I'll tell you what I would do, and I would be very proud to do it. I would say we would both leave this debate right now. I'd like to see her go down to Washington, D.C. during this debate because we're wasting a lot of time. Go down to, because she's been so bad, it's so ridiculous. Go down to Washington, D.C. and let her sign a bill to close up the border because they have the right to do it. They don't need bills. They have the right to do it. The President of the United States, you'll get him out of bed, you'll wake him up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right. You'll say, come on down to the office, let's sign a bill. If he signs a bill that the border is closed, all he has to do is say it to the Border Patrol, who are phenomenal. phenomenal. If they do that, the border is closed.
Mr.
Those
President,
people are killing many people, unlike J6.
We talked immigration here tonight. I do want to focus on this next issue to both of you, because it really brings us this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
That.
You know that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it. And they should have sent it back to the legislatures for approval. I got almost 75 million votes, the most votes any sitting president has ever gotten. I was told if I got 63, which was what I got in 2016, you can't be beaten. The election, people should never be thinking about it. An election is fraudulent. We need two things. We need walls. And we have to have it. We have to have borders, and we have to have good elections. Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them Republican.
No judge looked at it.
And said
they said we didn't have standing. That's the other thing. They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing? The president of the United States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter, because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by a whisker. So he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did, in fact, lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact. That's deeply troubling, and the American people deserve better.
I'll give you 1 minute to respond, Mr. President.
Let me just tell you about world leaders. Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men, they call him a strong man. He's a tough person, smart. Prime Minister of Hungary. They said, why is the whole world blowing up? 3 years ago it wasn't. Why is it blowing up? He said, because you need Trump back as president. They were afraid of him. China was afraid, and I don't like to use the word afraid, but I'm just quoting him. China was afraid of him. North Korea was afraid of him. Look at what's going on with North Korea, by the way. He said Russia was afraid of him. I ended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and Biden put it back on day one, but he ended the XL pipeline. The XL pipeline in our country. He ended that. But he let the Russians build a pipeline going all over Europe and heading into Germany, the biggest pipeline in the world. Look, Viktor Orban said it. He said the most respected, most feared person is Donald Trump. We had no problems when Trump was president, but when this weak, pathetic man that you saw at a debate just a few months ago, that if he weren't in that debate, he'd be running instead of her. She got no votes. He got 14 million votes. What you did, you talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes, and they threw him out of office. And you know what? I'll give you a little secret. He hates her. He can't stand her. But he got 14 million votes. They threw him out. She got 0 votes. And when she ran, she was the first one to leave because she failed. And now she's running. I don't understand it, but I'm okay with it because
your time is
I think we're going to do very well.
We've got a lot more to get to.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis. Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran, and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
President Trump, how would you negotiate with Netanyahu and also Hamas in order to get the hostages out and prevent the killing of more innocent civilians in Gaza?
If I were president, it would have never started. If I were president, Russia would have never, ever, I know Putin very well, he would have never, and there was no threat of it either, by the way, for 4 years, have gone into Ukraine and killed millions of people when you add it up, far worse than people understand what's going on over there. But when she mentions about Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was at a sorority party of hers. She wanted to go to the sorority party. She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population because the whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation, and now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast, and I'll get the war with Ukraine and Russia ended. If I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming president.
Vice President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
That's absolutely not true. I have my entire career and life supported Israel and the Israeli people. He knows that. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality, which is it is very well known that Donald Trump is weak and wrong on national security and foreign policy. It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself. It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine. It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant. It is well known he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un. And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear. They can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on national security, including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
They're the ones, and she's the one that caused it, that's weak on national security by allowing every nation last month for the year, 168 different countries sending people into our country. Their crime rates are way down. Putin endorsed her last week, said, I hope she wins. And I think he meant it, because what he's gotten away with is absolutely incredible. It wouldn't have happened with me. The leaders of other countries think that they're weak and incompetent, and they are. They're grossly incompetent. And I just ask one question. Why does Biden go in and kill the Keystone Pipeline and approve the single biggest deal that Russia's ever made, Nord Stream 2, the biggest pipeline anywhere in the world going to Germany and all over Europe? Because they're weak and they're ineffective. And Biden, by the way,
President
gets paid
Trump,
a lot of money.
Thank you. We have a lot of issues to get to.
We'll be right back with much more of this historic ABC News presidential debate from the National Constitution Center right here in Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
The ABC News presidential debate will continue after this.
Story live from Paris, live in Tel Aviv. We are here in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Every weeknight, it's your news playlist. Top Story with Tom Llamas, streaming weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
We're back with tonight's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
When it ends in just a few minutes, join us for an analysis of tonight's key moments. Our team will break down how it could shake up the final sprint to Election Day. For now, though, let's go back to the debate live in Philadelphia.
Live from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here again, David Muir and Lindsay Davis.
Welcome back to this historic ABC News presidential debate tonight. We're going to continue here, and I want to turn to the war in Ukraine. We're now 2.5 years into this conflict. Mr. President, it has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for $250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, Either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin, hasn't spoken to anybody. They don't even try and get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw Putin after I left, unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell. But after I left, when I saw him building up soldiers, he did it after I left, I said, oh, he must be negotiating. It must be a good, strong point of negotiation. Well, it wasn't, because Biden had no idea how to talk to him. He had no idea how to stop it. And now you have millions of people dead, and it's only getting worse, and it could lead to World War III. Don't kid yourself, David. We're playing with World War III, and we have a president that we don't even know if he's... Where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they
here...
They threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president,
Mr. President,
that doesn't know he's alive.
Your time is up. Just to clarify in the question, do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris. I want to get your thoughts on support for Ukraine in this moment, but also, as Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to defy one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine in its righteous defense. And because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. And understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Vice President Harris, thank you. We've heard from both of you on Ukraine tonight. Afghanistan came up in the last hour. I wanted her to respond to something you said earlier, and I'll give you a minute here.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women, but he would have been sitting in Moscow. Quiet, please. He would have been sitting in Moscow, much happier than he is right now. But eventually, you know, he's got a thing that other people don't have. He's got nuclear weapons. They don't ever talk about that. He's got nuclear weapons. Nobody ever thinks about that. And eventually, maybe he'll use them, and maybe he hasn't been that threatening. But he does have that, something we don't even like to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about it. But just so you understand, they sent her to negotiate peace before this war started. 3 days later, he went in and he started the war because everything they said was weak and stupid. They said the wrong things. That war should have never started. She was the emissary. They sent her in to negotiate with Zelensky and Putin, and she did. And the war started 3 days later. And that's the kind of talent we have with her. She's worse than Biden. In my opinion, I think he's the worst president in the history of our country. She goes down as the worst vice president in the history of our country. But let me tell you something. She is a horrible negotiator. They sent her in to negotiate. As soon as they left, Putin did the invasion.
President Trump, thank you. You did bring up something. You said she went to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. Vice President Harris, have you ever met Vladimir Putin? Can you clarify tonight?
Yet again, I said it at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fellow. And that is another one. When I went to meet with President Zelensky, I've now met with him over 5 times. The reality is it has been about standing as America always should, as a leader upholding international rules and norms, as a leader who shows strength, understanding that the alliances we have around the world are dependent on our ability to look out for our friends and not favor our enemies because you adore strongmen instead of caring about democracy. And that is very much what is at stake here. The President of the United States is commander-in-chief. And the American people have a right to rely on a president who understands the significance of America's role and responsibility in terms of ensuring that there is stability and ensuring we stand up for our principles and not sell them for the benefit of personal flattery.
We've talked about Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. I do want to talk about Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of this debate. I want to move on to Afghanistan.
Stoltenberg said Trump did the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He got these countries, the 28 countries at the time, to pay up. He said, I've never seen. He's the head of NATO. He said, I've never seen. For years, we were paying almost all of NATO. We were being ripped off by European nations, both on trade and on NATO. I got them to pay up by saying one of the statements you made before, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you. Otherwise, we would have never gotten it. He said it was one of the most incredible jobs that he's ever seen done.
Thank you. I want to turn to Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of the debate, and we witnessed a poignant moment today on Capitol Hill, honoring the soldiers who died in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I do want to ask the Vice President, do you believe you bear any responsibility in the way that withdrawal played out?
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day we were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century. But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released. And get this, and the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as president, invited them to Camp David because he does not, again, appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect. And this gets back to the point of how he has consistently disparaged and demeaned members of our military, fallen soldiers, and the work that we must do to uphold the strength and the respect of the United States of America around the world.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, your response to her saying that you began the negotiations with the Taliban.
So if you take a look at that period of time, the Taliban was killing our soldiers, a lot of them, with snipers. And I got involved with the Taliban because the Taliban was doing the killing. That's the fighting force within Afghanistan. They don't bother doing that because, you know, they deal with the wrong people all the time. But I got involved. And Abdul is the head of the Taliban. He is still the head of the Taliban. And I told Abdul, don't do it anymore. You do it anymore, you're going to have problems. And he said, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you're going to have to figure that out, Abdul. And for 18 months, we had nobody killed. We did have an agreement negotiated by Mike Pompeo. It was a very good agreement. The reason it was good, we were getting out. We would have been out faster than them, but we wouldn't have lost the soldiers. We wouldn't have left many Americans behind, and we wouldn't have left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful military equipment behind. And just to finish, they blew it. The agreement said you have to do this, this, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it. The agreement was terminated by us because they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
I want to move on.
And these people did the worst withdrawal and, in my opinion, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. And by the way, that's why Russia attacked Ukraine, because they saw how incompetent she and her boss are.
President Trump, thank you. I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
I think it's, I mean, honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. You know, I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me, can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
Vice President Harris, thank you. Lindsay?
President Trump, this is now your 3rd time.
This is the most divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything like it. They're destroying our country, and they come up with things like what she just said. going back many, many years, when a lot of people, including Mayor Bloomberg, agreed with me on the Central Park Five. They admitted, they said, they pled guilty. And I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately. And if they pled guilty, then they pled, we're not guilty. But this is a person that has to stretch back years, 40, 50 years ago, because there's nothing now. I built one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, and I'm going to build it again. It's going to be bigger, better, and stronger. But they're destroying our economy. They have no idea what a good economy is. Their oil policies, every single policy. And remember this, she is Biden. You know, she's trying to get away from Biden. I don't know the gentleman, she says. She is Biden. The worst inflation we've ever had, a horrible economy because inflation has made it so bad, and she can't get away with that.
Thank you. Your time is up, Lindsay.
I want to respond to that, though. I want to just respond briefly. Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country, one who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people. I believe in what we can do to strengthen our small businesses, which is why I have a plan. Let's talk about our plans and let's compare the plans. I have a plan to give startup businesses $50,000 tax deduction, to pursue their ambitions, their innovation, their ideas, their hard work. I have a plan, $6,000 for young families for the first year of your child's life, to help you in that most critical stage of your child's development. I have a plan that is about allowing people to be able to pursue what has been fleeting in terms of the American dream by offering a help with down payment of $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight, as opposed to a conversation that is constantly about belittling and name-calling. Let's turn the page
Vice President
and move
Harris,
forward.
thank you. Let's turn to policy.
President
Let's
Trump,
turn back
we
to
have
policy.
to move on. President Trump.
Let's turn to policy, please.
She has a plan to defund the police. She has a plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
President Trump,
she has
we do
a
have to
plan
move on
to
to
not
other
allow
issues.
fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere else.
Okay.
That's what her plan is until just recently.
I just need
Lindsay,
to
go ahead.
respond because
Trump,
no, the
President
former
Trump,
president has said
no,
something twice that I need to respond to.
I'm sorry. We're going to move on, Vice President Harris.
President
Trump, this is now your third time running for president. You have long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You have failed to accomplish that. You now say you're going to keep Obamacare, quote, unless we can do something much better.
Correct.
Last month, you said, quote, we're working on it. So tonight, 9 years after you first started running, do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care, always was. It's not very good today. And what I said, that if we come up with something, and we are working on things, we're going to do it and we're going to replace it. But remember this, I inherited Obamacare because Democrats wouldn't change it. They wouldn't vote for it. They were unanimous. They wouldn't vote to change it. If they would have done that, we would have had a much better plan than Obamacare. But the Democrats came up. They wouldn't vote for it. I had a choice to make when I was president. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, never going to be great, or do I let it rot? And I felt I had an obligation, even though politically it would have been good to just let it rot and let it go away. I decided, and I told my people, the top people, and they're very good people. I have a lot of good people in that administration. We read about the bad ones. We had some real bad ones, too, and so do they. They have really bad ones. The difference is they don't get rid of them. But let me just explain. I had a choice to make. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, or do I let it rot? And I saved it. I did the right thing. But it's still never going to be great, and it's too expensive for people. And what we will do is we're looking at different plans. If we can come up with a plan that's going to cost our people, our population, less money and be better health care than Obamacare, then I would absolutely do it. But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something. I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that, and you'll be hearing about it in the not-too-distant future.
Vice President Harris, in 2017, you supported Bernie Sanders' proposal to do away with private insurance and create a government-run health care system. 2 years later, you proposed a plan that included a private insurance option. What is your plan today?
Well, first of all, I absolutely support, and over the last 4 years as vice president, private health care options. But what we need to do is maintain and grow the Affordable Care Act. But I'll get to that, Lindsay. I just need to respond to a previous point that the former president has made. I've made very clear my position on fracking. And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff. As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand. When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 60 times. I was a senator at the time when I will never forget the early morning hours when it was up for a vote in the United States Senate. And the late, great John McCain, who you have disparaged as being, you don't like him, you said, at the time because he got caught. He was an American hero. The late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan. And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell the people watching tonight, you remember what that was like? Remember when an insurance company could deny if a child had asthma, if someone was a breast cancer survivor, if a grandparent had diabetes? And thankfully, as I've been vice president, and we, over the last 4 years, have strengthened the Affordable Care Act, we have allowed, for the first time, Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of you, the American people. Donald Trump said he was going to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. He never did. We did. And now we have capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Since I've been vice president, we have capped the cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000 a year. And when I am president, we will do that for all people, understanding that the value I bring to this is that access to health care should be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. And the plan has to be to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, not get rid of it.
Vice President Harris,
in terms of where Donald Trump stands on that.
I want to move to an issue that's important for a lot of...
You made a mistake. At number one, John McCain fought Obamacare for 10 years. But it wasn't only him. It were all of the Democrats that kept it going. And you know what? We can do much better than Obamacare, much less money. But she won't improve private insurance for people, private medical insurance. That's another thing she doesn't want to get. People are paying privately for insurance that have worked hard and made money, and they want to have private. She wants everybody to be on government insurance where you wait 6 months for an operation that you need immediately.
President Trump, thank you. We have another issue that we'd like to get to that's important for a number of Americans, in particular younger voters, and that's climate change. President Trump, with regard to the environment, you say that we have to have clean air and clean water. Vice President Harris, you call climate change an existential threat. The question to you both tonight is, what would you do to fight climate change? And Vice President Harris, we'll start with you. 1 minute for you each.
Well, the former president had said the climate change is a hoax. And what we know is that it is very real. You ask anyone who lives in a state who has experienced these extreme weather occurrences, who now is either being denied home insurance or it's being jacked up. You ask anybody who has been the victim of what that means in terms of losing their home, having nowhere to go. We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels. We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I have been vice president. We have invested in clean energy to the point that we are opening up factories around the world. Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs. And I'm also proud to have the endorsement of the United Auto Workers and Shawn Fain, who also know that part of building a clean energy economy includes investing in American-made products, American automobiles. It includes growing what we can do around American manufacturing and
Vice President Harris, thank you.
That didn't happen under Donald Trump. Let me just tell you, they lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs this last month. It's going, they're all leaving. They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China. They're building these massive plants, and they think they're going to sell their cars into the United States because of these people. What they have given to China is unbelievable. But we're not going to let that. We'll put tariffs on those cars so they can't come into our country, because they will kill the United Auto Workers and any auto worker, whether it's in Detroit or South Carolina or any other place. What they've done to business and manufacturing in this country is horrible. We have nothing because they refuse. You know, Biden doesn't go after people because supposedly China paid him millions of dollars. He's afraid to do it. Between him and his son, they get all this money from Ukraine. They get all this money from all of these different countries. And then you wonder, why is he so loyal to this one, that one, Ukraine, China? Why is he? Why did he get $3.5 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife? Why did she pay him $3.5 million? This is a crooked administration, and they're selling our country down the tubes.
President Trump, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with closing statements from both of our candidates. An historic night, this ABC News presidential debate from Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
The ABC News presidential debate will continue after this.
Now is raw.
How hard is it to see it like this?
Our house is no longer here, but we are here.
Now is real.
Let's break down what we know and then the big questions still outstanding.
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
We're back with tonight's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
And when it ends, please join us for analysis of tonight's key moments. Our team will break it down. As we enter the final sprint to Election Day, we'll go back to the debate and closing statements.
Live from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here again, David Muir and Lindsay Davis.
Welcome back tonight. The time has come for closing statements, and Vice President Harris, we begin with you.
So I think you've heard tonight two very different visions for our country. One that is focused on the future, and the other that is focused on the past, and an attempt to take us backward. But we're not going back. And I do believe that the American people know we all have so much more in common than what separates us. And we can chart a new way forward. And a vision of that includes having a plan, understanding the aspirations, the dreams, the hopes, the ambition of the American people, which is why I intend to create an opportunity economy, investing in small businesses, in new families, in what we can do around protecting seniors, what we can do that is about giving hardworking folks a break and bringing down the cost of living. I believe in what we can do together that is about sustaining America's standing in the world and ensuring that we have the respect that we so rightly deserve, including respecting our military and ensuring we have the most lethal fighting force in the world. I will be a president that will protect our fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. I'll tell you, I started my career as a prosecutor. I was a DA, I was an attorney general, a United States senator, and now vice president. I've only had one client, the people. And I'll tell you, as a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on what we can do over the next 10 and 20 years to build back up our country by investing right now in you, the American people.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump?
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful White House, go to the Capitol, get everyone together and do the things you want to do, but you haven't done it, and you won't do it because you believe in things that the American people don't believe in. You believe in things like we're not going to frack. We're not going to take fossil fuel. We're not going to do things that are going to make this country strong, whether you like it or not. Germany tried that, and within 1 year, they were back to building normal energy plants. We're not ready for it. We can't sacrifice our country for the sake of bad vision. But I just ask one simple question. Why didn't she do it? We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline. We're being laughed at all over the world. All over the world, they're laughed. I know the leaders very well. They're coming to see me. They call me. We're laughed at all over the world. They don't understand what happened to us as a nation. We're not a leader. We don't have any idea what's going on. We have wars going on in the Middle East. We have wars going on with Russia and Ukraine. We're going to end up in a third world war, and it'll be a war like no other because of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. I rebuilt our entire military. She gave a lot of it away to the Taliban. She gave it to Afghanistan. What these people have done to our country, and maybe toughest of all, is allowing millions of people to come into our country. Many of them are criminals, and they're destroying our country. The worst president, the worst vice president in the history of our country.
President Trump, thank you. And that is our ABC News presidential debate from here in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center. I'm Lindsay Davis.
And I'm David Muir. Thank you for watching here in the U.S. and all over the world, and from all of us here at ABC News. Good night.
And welcome back to NBC News coverage of the debate. Pick your adjective. I would go with fiery to begin, but it goes from there. Both the candidates, you could argue, executing on their strategy going in. For Kamala Harris, that was to get under the former president's skin, which she did quite often. For the former president, his option was, of course, to go after the economy, after Afghanistan, the administration's position on the withdrawal in Afghanistan. And immigration, of course. This is exactly what they wanted. The question is how they got there, and along the way, I think.
Well, people are going to be talking about this debate for a long time. And is this the final debate? Is this the only one we're going to see? Will there be another? Well, it depends on how each candidate feels they did tonight. Let's bring back our moderator of Meet the Press, Kristen Welker, our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. Boy, do we have a lot to chew over here.
Yes,
I mean, let's talk about, first of all, it does seem that Kamala Harris was trying to hit every trigger point she could think of to try to get Donald Trump to respond to her and to kind of fall into, bait him into that trap. Do you think it was effective?
Well, let's just name a few. Abortion, January 6th, his former officials who are now critical of him. John McCain, which is a big trigger point.
His rally size.
His rally size, one of the biggest ones that gets under his skin. One of his allies said she clearly tried to get under his skin. He's being defensive way too much. He's losing his answers. For example, instead of border czar, we had eating pets. Of course, that theory that Springfield officials in Ohio are saying there's no proof that undocumented immigrants are eating pets, something that we've heard from Trump and his campaign. And I think that allies are expressing concern about the fact that he didn't do what they were hoping he would do, which is to stay on message, to talk about his strengths. There were some unanswered questions as well. It's worth noting out on both sides. Harris never answered whether you're better off than you were 4 years ago. She also didn't say what she would have done differently on immigration. Trump, by the way, didn't answer the critical question. Would he veto a national abortion ban if it came to his desk? I asked J.D. Vance if Trump would do that. He said said, yes, he would. Trump said tonight, well, he didn't check with me before saying that. So some differences there. Again, how does this play with those swing voters?
Holly, what are Republicans saying tonight that you're monitoring?
I think there's immense frustration on the part of those allied with Donald Trump about the moderators. That is something that you sometimes hear after debates. I think that is certainly a through line here. There is some frustration, I think, I spoke with one Republican who called former President Trump wild and uncontrolled and said that the vice president was successfully pushing his buttons and getting him angry. Another ally said, listen, she is doing what they thought she would do, avoiding the issues and going on attack against former President Trump. She did that, as you have laid out. She baited him again and again. We talk about substance and style being the two kind of buckets in any debate. If that's the style, you look at substance here. She was pressed on her shift away from some of those more progressive positions in that crowded primary. She says, my values haven't changed. And it wasn't just, of course, the issue of abortion access and whether he'd veto a national abortion ban that the former president did not answer on. He did not discuss how he would implement one of his central issues on immigration, mass deportations. And he also didn't get into his plan to replace Obamacare, simply saying, I have concepts of a plan. He will be pressed on that moving forward.
He also didn't commit to saying he wants Ukraine to be victorious in the war. So that was an interesting exchange as well. So she was trying to prosecute the case against him, but also present an affirmative vision of herself and what she might do in a term. Let's go to Tom Llamas. He's in the spin room for us. So, Tom, I'm sure you're already starting to see people filter in. And what are you hearing?
Yeah. Okay, guys, so it's still very early, right? Each campaign is sort of getting their talking points out and making sure everyone's on the same message before they pour into the spin room. Some people are coming in right now. There's a crush of reporters at the entrance waiting for everybody. I can tell you in the meantime, my phone has been blowing up with both Republican strategists, Democratic strategists, voters. I've been asking everyone what they think. It is a complete different shift change from that first debate. After that first debate, Republicans felt very victorious, very confident. They were saying the entire debate was about Joe Biden. This time, it's much different. Republicans seemed very frustrated with former President Trump. They also felt frustrated with the format of the debate, which is never a good sign on your side. And then also saying that they were able, at least Vice President Kamala Harris was able to make this debate not about Joe Biden, not about herself, but about Donald Trump. And that led to her advantage. So again, many of the surrogates are coming in right now. Governors, senators from different parties. We're going to be talking to them throughout the night. I'm going to send it back to you guys in the studio right now.
All right, Tom, thanks. Let's bring in Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. He's a Democrat representing the Harris campaign. Governor, thank you for being here. Let me first ask you, do you think the voters were served by what we saw in the last 90 minutes? Served well, I guess.
Look, I think the voters heard a lot and learned a lot. You know, one of the things I was a little bit worried about going into this debate is that some folks had a little brain fog about Donald Trump. They sort of didn't remember the chaos of Donald Trump's time in office. Well, I'll tell you what, I think Kamala Harris cleared that brain fog out, reminded people of the disaster that he was as president. And I think it was also clear as she was laying out a vision to take this country, Donald Trump didn't have a clear vision on where he wanted to go. Instead, it was more grievance and division, more attacks on other people. And Donald Trump, I think, will make our country less safe, more chaotic, and less free. And Donald Trump prosecuted the heck out of the case tonight. Well, Kamala Harris prosecuted the case tonight. Pardon me.
Oh, against Donald Trump. Gotcha. Okay, got you. You know, I thought Donald Trump toward the end finally got around to what he was hoping to accomplish, which is say, if you have all these plans and you have all this vision, Kamala Harris, you've had 3.5 years to do it. Why haven't you? So what is the answer to that?
She has served as vice president. She knows the job to be president. Now she has laid out her vision for where she wants to take this country. I thought she was very specific on her plans to cut taxes, particularly for small business owners, her way of trying to bring down costs for middle-class families. Donald Trump, I don't know what the heck he thinks. He was all over the place. I think what you heard was a rambling man full of nonsense and full of a whole lot of grievance. He couldn't get past that, and he couldn't focus on anybody but himself, and that is serving the good people of this nation, something Kamala Harris has done throughout her career and has plans to do going forward.
Do you think either will have an appetite for a second debate after this one?
Look, I think that'll be up to either one of them. I'm not going to sit here and guess what'll happen. But I'll tell you what, if there is not another debate, what the American people saw tonight was a clear contrast in steady, future-looking leadership versus the chaotic, divisive leadership of the past of Donald Trump.
Governor Shapiro, thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate it.
We're going to hear from Senator Marco Rubio in just a moment. We have a few moments to turn back to our table. So what about it? I mean, it was just, it's clear that the Democrats and the allies of Kamala Harris are very happy with the way that she prosecuted the case against Donald Trump. But we know going in, about 30% of voters were saying, we don't really know who she is or what she's about. Do you think she did enough to define herself, to make that affirmative case?
I don't. There were a couple of answers where she talked about her economic plans. It's the top issue. Trump beats her on that point. I think people still have a lot of questions about what she would do on the economy.
One interesting nugget, by our team's count, the former president said the name Biden something like 15 times, didn't say Kamala or Harris once. She addressed that by saying, clearly, I'm not Joe Biden. But I think that's an interesting point, is where the former president's head is at this point.
All right, let's bring in Florida Senator Marco Rubio. He's a surrogate for the Trump campaign. Senator, thanks for coming on with us. Did we see the best version of Donald Trump, in your opinion, tonight?
Well, two things. These candidates have very different objectives going in. Donald Trump's well known. He was president of the United States. He's been campaigning basically for the last 8 years, 4 years, actually going back to 2016. Most voters didn't even know who Kamala Harris was. Tonight, for the first time, they got glimpses of it. Look, I don't think the moderators did the best job of pressing her on this, but I think got glimpses of what she has stood for as recently as 2019 and 2020. And here in Philadelphia, and here in Pennsylvania, where she wanted to ban fracking. But beyond that, I think there are all kinds of things that the moderators never asked, questions that I wanted to see asked. For example, grocery prices are up 50% from 2020. What is your responsibility for that? I thought her answer on Afghanistan was complete nonsense. She was vice president at the time. Joe Biden didn't withdraw from Afghanistan. We were run out of Afghanistan. So on issue after issue, I think for the first time, voters are starting to get a glimpse of someone and starting to understand the positions that she truly believes in. She's basically cut and paste, literally cut and paste out of the Biden agenda. People don't want the Biden agenda. But what she really believes in are the radical ideas that she ran on in 2019 and 2020. I think for a lot of Americans who don't know a lot about her, tonight they were introduced to those facts. I think that's going to have an impact on this race.
Senator, you just laid out the case against her pretty clearly. Do you wish that Donald Trump had done so more clearly?
Well, I think he did. Unfortunately, like I said, look, I'm not one of these guys that likes to complain about moderators. This one was tough not to. I think it was really one-sided, and some of the fact-checking was wrong. There are, in fact, states in this country, the state of Minnesota, where a child born in a botched abortion is allowed to die, provided palliative care and allowed to die. So some of the fact-checking I thought was truly unfair, but on balance, as people heard things about, you wanted to take away guns from people in the past, you wanted the Bernie Sanders health care plan, you wanted to ban fracking, you bailed out, tried to raise money to bail out rioters in 2020 in the summer. These are new facts that a lot of people don't know about Kamala Harris that they learned tonight for the first time. And I think, as you've seen in the polling, a lot of 25% of Americans wanted to learn more about him. They learned more about her tonight.
All right, Senator Rubio, thank you for your time. We want to go to Kate Snow. She's been talking with a group of undecided voters in where else? Battleground, Pennsylvania. Kate, we've all been dying to hear what they thought and how they reacted to what they heard tonight.
Yeah, Savannah, it's been really interesting watching with you all because I could see your reactions in real time. There were a lot of visceral reactions. In one word, if I can ask, how would you headline this debate? One word to describe what you saw, Lynn.
Well, it's 4 words. Same old, same old.
Hannah.
Manipulative.
And Andrew.
Lies on both sides.
Okay.
Lies.
You came in all undecided. Has anything changed your mind tonight? Is there anything you heard here that you thought, oh, yeah, I could go for that policy. I could stand with that candidate?
Not really. For me, I think Kamala had a good debate. I feel more favorably towards her than to Donald, but I'm still not sure. Not 100%.
The two of you women reacted very strongly when Harris was talking about abortion, when both candidates were talking about abortion rights. You reacted strongly to Donald Trump and his positions. You seemed emotional about it, Hannah.
Yes.
What was your thought on that? What was it about that part of the debate that struck you?
His misinformation. He sensationalized just so much facts or not things that are not facts that have been disproven.
When he was talking about,
he does it because that is what his supporters want to hear, and it really impacts who people like us if we choose to vote for him or not, because we know you are lying, but you're still saying it, and it's disgusting.
You all said it was the economy going in. Andrew, anything you heard that changes how you're thinking about their economic policies?
No, because at the end of the day, December and November is going to roll around, and they're going to pass. They're going to say we're going to shut down the government, and they're going to pass an omnibus, and they're going to spend trillions of dollars, and nothing else is going to change. They're just going to keep spending money uncontrollably. Donald Trump spent $6 trillion in 2019 and added that to our deficit. So absolutely not. They're spending money, and then it's coming back into the government, into the congressmen, into the Senate through funds, through PACs, through all the disgustingness.
Andrew, thank you so much. Hannah, Lynn, it's great to be with you. I'll send it back to you guys.
All right, Kate, thanks very much. Kristen Welker, Hallie Jackson back for some final thoughts. Kristen, first to you. Will we know who won this debate in days or weeks or months?
Well, a couple of weeks, I would say, once we look at the new poll numbers, Lester. As we've been saying, the Harris campaign feels emboldened. They just put out a statement saying Vice President Harris is ready for a second debate. Is Donald Trump? The big question, will that actually happen? And again, it's just fascinating to hear the voters who are sitting there with Kate Snow, to hear that one of them at least feels a little bit more favorably toward Harris.
As we start to close our coverage, I always like to say Election Day is XX days away. But in fact, Election Day is, well, it starts tomorrow in one state, but is 6 days away in Pennsylvania.
That's right.
Early voting is a huge factor.
Those mail-in ballots going out in Pennsylvania. You've got it in other battleground states as well coming up soon, including Michigan just this month. So that is for real, right? What's happening tonight matters when people go to make their decision about who they want in the White House. So will there be a second debate? That's an open question. You look at what's next. All four of these leaders, Kamala Harris and her running mate, former President Trump, and his running mate, will be in 9/11 ceremonies tomorrow.
All right, Haley, thanks. Hallie, that concludes our coverage of tonight's debate between Vice President Harris and former President Trump.
More coverage tomorrow morning on Today. We'll see you bright and early. I'm Savannah Guthrie, Lester Holt, Hallie Jackson, Kristen Welker.
This is NBC News special coverage of the first presidential debate between former President Trump.
Look, we've had a terrible economy.
And Vice President Kamala Harris.
What we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess.
The two candidates meeting in person for the first time ever.
So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say we don't have to go back.
I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country.
A historic face-off.
What she says is an absolute lie.
You're going to hear from the same old tired playbook.
The former president battling to win back the White House.
I had no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country.
The vice president running to be the nation's first female president.
It's insulting to the women of America.
Each arguing the other is unfit to lead the country.
Donald Trump actually has no plan for you because he is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window.
It is the biggest event yet.
Just a moment, as you're watching NBC News Now's live coverage of what could be the most consequential night of the 2024 presidential election. You see right there the historic handshake between Vice President Kamala Harris, here it is, and former President Trump. This is actually the first time the two of them ever met, not just on a debate stage, but in person, period. And tempers ran hot tonight with personal attacks just minutes into the hour-and-a-half-long debate. Both sides trying to play to their strengths, like Vice President Harris hammering Mr. Trump on reproductive rights, his defense of Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade, and what she called lies about abortion.
Nowhere in America is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion. That is not happening. It's insulting to the women of America.
The former president preferring to talk more about immigration, pushing debunked claims about Haitian migrants in Ohio, and accusing the vice president of allowing undocumented immigrants into the country.
And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
Fact-checking also becoming a big part of the night, with the moderators stepping in to correct the record repeatedly, including one instance when the former president refused to back down from the false claim that he won the 2020 election.
In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
That.
You know that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof.
Let's get right to my NBC News colleagues, Peter Alexander and Garrett Haake, out there in the spin room. Peter covers the Harris campaign, Garrett, the Trump campaign. And Garrett, I want to start with you. Tell me what you're hearing from inside the Trump campaign.
Inside the Trump campaign, they're very confident in how he performed tonight. They think this foreign policy segment was the strongest part of his performance tonight. If you go one layer out, though, the Republicans who advised this campaign, who are rooting for this campaign, they are frustrated. I've been talking to Republican operatives, including some folks who are involved in the debate preparation for this president, who don't feel like he took advantage of the opportunities that were presented to him. Now, granted, some of them were frustrated about the moderators. They were frustrated about the topics. They're frustrated that Kamala Harris, for example, didn't get asked a direct question about inflation, an issue that they think is one of their strongest issues. But they realized that their guy didn't take advantage of what he was trying to do. All day I was talking to these Trump folks who told me they wanted to make Kamala Harris own the most liberal past positions that she's taken, and really only on the issue of fracking do they feel like they were successful. They just wasn't able to tie her to the things they felt like they needed to tie her to have a clear win tonight.
Are you getting the sense, because I'm getting the sense from the Republicans I'm talking to, it was a shift change when you compare it to the Atlanta debate? Coming out of the Atlanta debate, I mean, they were victorious, they were happy, they were congratulating each other. Here it's much different. There's frustration, there's anger, they're blaming moderators, and I think you're right, with that outside layer, they're frustrated a little bit with the former president. Has the former president spoken out yet? Has he posted yet anything on Truth Social?
He's posted two things. One, suggesting that it was a strong debate performance because it was 3-on-1, so his own complaint about the moderators. I expect we'll hear more of that. And he posted a meme of him with AI-generated cats, a nod to that line where he was arguing with the moderator about immigrants eating pets, which I think, you know, just as my own view, feels like somebody who's much more online than millions of viewers here tonight who are probably going to have no idea what he's even referencing. Right. I think that is not the turf that a campaign that wants to be fighting for the middle of the country perhaps wants to be fighting
We
on.
should mention Senator J.D. Vance, the running mate, is somewhere here in the spin room. He's gaggling with reporters. We'll bring you that sound as soon as we have it. I do want to ask you about that moment, though, when the moderators asked former President Trump about something J.D. Vance had said about vetoing a national abortion bill. Talk to me about that moment, because it seemed like the ticket wasn't on the same page.
No, this is really striking. I mean, Donald Trump has had, over the course of his career, every conceivable position on abortion. Where he has landed now is that he believes it's an issue for the states, and he has used that to avoid taking direct questions about what, if any, federal policy he would take. He has not answered directly about whether he would veto a national abortion ban. But when J.D. Vance was on Meet the Press, I guess 2 weeks ago now, Kristen Welker asked him about this, and he kind of took Trump's position to what a lot of people thought was the logical conclusion. If he doesn't support a ban, yes, I suppose he would veto it. Trump wouldn't go that far tonight. And Tom, that's the second time I can think of off the top of my head where Trump has distanced himself from a sort of Vance projection of a Trump position. Now on abortion, also on the child tax credit, where Vance has proposed a much more generous expansion of the child tax credit than Trump has. When you and your, ticket mate are not on the same page, that is a problem for a ticket. If J.D. Vance can't credibly speak for Donald Trump, what's he out there talking about?
Right. Garrett Haake, stand by for us. I know when you have new reporting, we'll come back to you during this broadcast. I want to go to my friend Peter Alexander, who's out there in the middle of the spin room somewhere. Peter, give me a sense of what's happening inside the Harris-Walz campaign right now, what they're telling you.
Yeah, Tom, let's walk through a series of items that have been breaking and developing as you two have been speaking right now. We'll start in order. First, we've heard from the communications director from Kamala Harris, a man by the name of Brian Fallon, who immediately after this debate wrapped up, posted on social media, "That was fun. Let's do it again in October." Clearly a message being sent by the Harris campaign for the first time publicly that they would like there to be a second Harris-Trump debate. We're waiting for any response from the Trump campaign. We'll try to bring that to you as soon as we hear about it. Separately, we are hearing from a senior Harris campaign official who is describing this in their words as just a plethora of, how do they say it specifically? They said basically that this was they had more to work with than they could have possibly imagined, that they had so much that they were hoping to amplify over the course of this night. And most notably, they focus on the topic of abortion. Specifically, it's on that issue where, according to the Harris campaign's dial groups, they say they saw a dramatic gap, one of the biggest gaps they've ever seen, particularly from the voters, women in particular, who were focused on this, saying that they were satisfied, pleased, and supportive of the words they heard from Kamala Harris. It's a message you're going to hear going forward. And then most notably, and perhaps most importantly in terms of the potential influence it will have on those young voters and other voters, Taylor Swift, with 283 million followers on her Instagram account, within the last 5 minutes, has just publicly come out in favor of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, saying that she will be voting for them. She said she came to this conclusion after she saw that there was an AI, an artificial intelligence, false account that suggested she would be supporting Donald Trump. And she said the best way to be transparent about her views was to make it very clear publicly where she stood on this issue. She says, I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris, she added, because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them. Just to put that in some context here, remember only a matter of months ago when Joe Biden was the presidential nominee for the Democrats, there was a real concern among Democrats that they weren't getting the support within the young voter community, those first-time voters in many cases, that they weren't energized by a man who was already 81 and would be 86 at the end of a second term if he was to serve. Obviously, Kamala Harris tonight, as you heard, casting herself as a generational candidate. They feel strongly, and certainly with this endorsement from Taylor Swift tonight, that sends a very clear message, first from the debate and separately from her social media, about the value that young people may find in a Harris presidency going forward. And finally, I'll just tell you, based on the takeaways I've had speaking to analysts in this room and hearing from Democrats and Republicans alike, one of the things that frustrated Republicans, frankly, and satisfied a lot of Democrats, Tom, was the sense that Kamala Harris, though she didn't answer some questions, which is receiving some criticism, she did not say, which perhaps was stunning to critics, that America is better off now than it was 4 years ago. They do believe she succeeded in making this a referendum not so much about the Biden-Harris administration, but about Donald Trump himself. It's one place that we're hearing from a lot of Democrats so far tonight. Back to you.
I'm hearing that as well. Before you go, Peter, I do want to ask you, can you get a sense yet if there will be a second debate, if Democrats will even want that, or is it one and done?
Yeah, Tom, no, just to the first point I was making, Brian Fallon, of course, the communications director, as we just indicated, he came out publicly immediately after this. He said, that was fun. Let's do it again in October. He is the communications director for the Harris campaign. So it appears pretty clear that their message is, we're glad to do this again. We're waiting for any reaction from the Trump campaign. They had said in the past, he had said publicly, anytime, anywhere. That was focused on a Joe Biden debate. He has said publicly that he'd be glad to do other debates as well. He was pushing for a Fox News debate. But again, to be clear, at least to the best of my reporting right now, and I defer to colleagues if they've heard anything in the last 3 minutes, we have not yet heard from the Trump campaign in response to that.
All right, Peter Alexander, we appreciate all your reporting. Joining our special coverage now is Republican Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas in the spin room here as a surrogate for the Trump campaign. Senator Cotton, thank you so much for joining us. Your thoughts first coming out of this debate.
Well, I thought this was a very good debate for President Trump. It laid out a clear contrast between not empty promises or slogans or predictions about what these candidates would do, but their clear records. It's a very unusual presidential election. President Trump has been in office before, first time in 100 years it's happened. We know what a president, what kind of president President Trump would be. He brought peace, prosperity, and stability around the world. Under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, we have record high inflation, wages are stagnant, the border is wide open, and we've had war and conflict all around the world. So no matter what you heard from Kamala Harris tonight, there's a clear record here to compare with President Trump's record.
And former President Trump said that. The problem was it was in the last 2 minutes of this debate. Do you think the vice president was successful in making this debate about Donald Trump and not about Biden-Harris?
No, I think she was successful in hiding her own liberal record to the best of her ability. President Trump did a good job of calling it out, though, not only in his closing statement, but throughout the debate, pointing out, for instance, that she does, in fact, support a ban on fracking. She supports a ban on gas-powered cars. She does want to confiscate private firearms. She wants to decriminalize illegal immigration. And as we just learned this week, she wants to use taxpayer dollars to pay for gender transition surgery for illegal immigrants in detention centers in America. Those are all records she's taken, not as a young woman in college or in a TV interview, kind of in a live setting where people could put a foot wrong, as you know, Tom. Those are her considered, deliberate positions that she took when she was running for president in her own right, or when she was serving the United States Senator.
And she said that she's, changed on some of those positions.
Well,
they're saying evolved, and you guys say flip-flop. I get it, but I just want to go on the record and say she's changed on some of those positions.
Actually, no. I don't say she's flip-flopped. She's lying. Bernie Sanders, on your network, said this weekend that she hasn't changed her positions. She's saying what she thinks she needs to get elected.
Right, that she's still a progressive. I do want to ask you, why do you think Republicans, at least the ones that I'm talking to that are strategists, voters, were frustrated with this debate? It was a much different vibe coming out of that Atlanta debate. What was different about this one? Why are you guys frustrated? A lot of you.
I mean, come on. The Atlanta debate was historic. I mean, President Trump ended his opponent's presidential campaign. I don't think you could expect that to happen again.
Right. But I think there's real frustration with some Republicans.
He did a great job tonight. I thought in some ways it was 3-on-1, all the fact checks that President Trump got, and they never fact checked Kamala Harris. She claimed that she doesn't support abortion in months 7, 8, or even 9 of a pregnancy, when in fact she voted to do that in the U.S. Senate. They didn't push.
But I got to say, but if you're going to be commander-in-chief, you know this. You can stand up to 2 journalists, right? I mean, even though you guys may have thought that moderators weren't fair.
And he did. I thought he did a good job in what was in effect a 3-on-1 debate. But Kamala Harris.
You think she was better prepared?
No, not at all. Because how can you be prepared to defend a ban on fracking, especially in Pennsylvania, to defend a ban on the sale of new gas-powered cars? These are her positions. This is what she supported as vice president and as a senator and as a soft-on-crime attorney general.
Before we go, do you think there's another presidential debate?
I don't know. I mean, President Trump proposed several other debates. Kamala Harris refused to take him up on it. I think if we had another debate, you'd see more of what you saw tonight, which is a clear contrast in these records, but I'll leave that to President Trump.
We spoke to a bunch of undecided voters that were watching this debate. They say after this debate, they're still undecided. So we'll have to wait and see if we have another debate. Senator, we thank you for your time. We appreciate that. I want to send it back to Hallie Jackson in New York, who's going to pick up some of our coverage right now.
Tom Yam is there in the very busy, very active spin room. Tom, thank you very much. Let me bring it back to the folks here at the table for us. Moderator of Meet the Press, Kristen Welker, our national political reporter, and big board icon Steve Kornacki, our chief political analyst Chuck Todd is with us as well. Kristen, let me go to you. You've heard now from the folks that Tom is talking to, from our reporters on the ground there. We've seen that Taylor Swift endorsement. Give us a sense of what things look like tomorrow morning, right? We're going to wake up. There's going to be a news cycle that unfolds. What does that look like?
Look, I think that Vice President Kamala Harris is going to feel emboldened after tonight. We've reported a lot about all of her preparations, her strategy to get under former President Trump's skin. She clearly did that on a range of issues, on abortion, January 6th, his crowd sizes. She brought up John McCain at the end. At the same time, while you have Trump allies saying, look, he was on the defensive way too much tonight. You also have some Harris allies saying she needs to now flesh out her economic proposals and answer that question that was left unanswered at the top of the debate about why people should feel better now than they did 4 years ago, and what she's going to do in the future to make people feel better about the high price of groceries, for example, how she's going to bring that down. You did hear her lay out some of her policies. I don't want to say that she didn't at all, but that is the number one issue for voters. Right now, Trump beats her. She's catching up to him on that issue, but her allies believe she should be hammering those points over and over again, that basically today and this evening and the debate was the start to what now she should take the momentum and move forward.
Okay, so Kristen, you're talking economy. Chuck, let me come to you, because reproductive rights is an issue where Kamala Harris sees a political vulnerability and a potential liability with Donald Trump here. That came up tonight. It is an issue where she outpolls him. I'm curious how you see that framing, considering that is something that campaign officials, as you heard from the conversation just a moment ago, on the Harris side, see as one of her strongest moments. And I got to tell you, Chuck, on this issue of sort of baiting, well, let me start there. Let me start on reproductive rights, and I'll come back to you on something else.
Okay, well, let me just stick to that issue for a second. Here's all I kept thinking about when she was talking very specifically about a woman sitting in the parking lot, potentially bleeding out because she wasn't going to get care because there was concern about the law. You know who wouldn't have made that rebuttal on that issue? Joe Biden. And it was so striking to me. Joe Biden could barely talk about the issue. It was really one of the biggest weaknesses of the campaign he was running, is his inability, whatever it is, his own, I think he was caught up in his own political positions, his own religious beliefs on this. Frankly, 40 years of talking about abortion one way, and then suddenly the conversation had changed and he didn't really evolve or modernize with it. That is what sort of struck me. Like here was an issue that is suddenly, I think the contrast is much clearer between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump than it was between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Everything else, you wouldn't have had that kind of clear contrast. But on that issue, more than any other, that was something you never would have seen from Joe Biden, no matter which version of Joe Biden you got, 2016, 2020, or the one we saw last June.
I'm going to call a quick timeout for just a second, because as we all know, spin rooms move fast, things go quickly. I know that somebody has just sat down, I think, next to Tom back in Philadelphia. So, Tom, let me turn it over to you for just a second, and then we'll come back and chat.
All right, Hallie, thank you for that. Yeah, joining us now, California Governor Gavin Newsom, a surrogate, of course, for the Harris-Walz team. So, Governor, your thoughts on this debate coming out of it?
I mean, if this was a prize fight, they would have done a TKO against Trump in the second round. It was an extraordinary performance from the get-go. She had the decency to go up and shake his hand, introduce herself as Kamala Harris, and she commanded the stage from the moment that debate began. I thought she did an exceptional job.
Let's talk about debate strategy, because she made the debate about Donald Trump, not about the Biden-Harris administration. Why was that a positive?
Well, I thought she not only made the case against Donald Trump, she also prosecuted the case for the future. She kept looking in the camera, talking about you, talking about me, talking about the issues that matter to the American people, on affordability, on housing, on child care. She was consistent in painting not only a picture of the current administration in the context of the accomplishments of Biden-Harris, but the pivot to a framework of a compelling future about the next 4 years, with end of the day is what this election is all about.
Right, but she was so, discipline's the word, every time she was asked a question, she'd almost answer it first about Trump and then maybe go into her response. And if you were looking for policy, you didn't get a whole lot of policy, to be quite fair. I mean, you got some of it towards the second hour, but this was a lot about the Trump administration.
Well, you got contrast. I mean, Chuck was absolutely right. It wasn't a criticism Chuck, I think, was making about President Biden on their issue of abortion. It was a compliment to Vice President Harris, her ability to bring you into the story, to tell a story, to humanize an issue. She did it across the spectrum of issues. He was on the defensive from day one. She won the debate. If the purpose of tonight was to win the debate, to show she's a commander-in-chief, to show she has character and temperance, to show that she can take on a bully like Donald Trump and put him on the defense so she can take on the dictators around the rest of the globe and lead this nation, I think she did it. And she also did this. She talked about all of us, not just some of us. I thought the best parts of the debate were at the end, when she was talking about the issues of race and talking about moving away from divisiveness and talking down to people and past people, and the fact that we're all in this together and we're all better off and we're all better off. It was a fantastic night.
Do you think there's another debate? If you were advising the Harris campaign, would you say that? Would you tell them to have another debate, October. Or do you think it's one and done? You think that you?
Well, absolutely. We talked about a couple debates. He said anytime, anywhere. Tough guy. Anytime, anywhere. By the way, that was weakness. Weakness, not even masquerading as a strength. I usually compliment him. Weakness masquerading as strength. He was weak across the board. I would love to see a debate.
You think it'd be good for the Harris campaign? It'd obviously be good for the American people, but you think it'd be good for Harris?
But what you just said, I don't want to be flippant about that. Good for the American people, good for democracy, good for freedom, good for the rule of law, good for not only this country, but the world we're trying to build. Absolutely good for Kamala Harris.
Do you think the Democratic Party and her handlers, her campaign, maybe loosen the reins a little bit, in the sense that maybe she does town halls where she's actually talking to voters? Maybe she does some more sit-down interviews. Yeah. I mean, were Democrats nervous about her, and now has she set the expectations?
Well, maybe somewhere, not me.
Yeah.
That's a comment. See, forgive me, that's a reveal to the extent people are surprised of something we've known about for decades in California. I've watched that Kamala Harris for years and years and years. So in so many ways, past was reflected in the present. And the good news, I know this about her, she keeps getting better and better and better. So to your question about getting out there even more, absolutely, you're going to see it. And I'm absolutely confident she'll provide more opportunities in that respect as well.
You know a lot about politics. How impactful, or will it not matter at all, is the Taylor Swift endorsement tonight?
No, I mean, very significant. For no other reason, there's an energy and pride that comes with that. There's an energy of youth, a quality of imagination. Trust me, it's reflected in my 4 children, all of them under the age of 14. They seem to know more about everything going on in Taylor Swift's life than anything else. I guarantee it. Within the next 24 hours, they're less likely to be talking about this interview, respectfully, with us, with their dad, and more about Taylor Swift's endorsement. So, in the way she did it, around this cat lady thing and the pejoratives and the way women have been treated in this country, that I think also is profoundly significant.
California Governor Gavin Newsom. Governor, we thank you for your time. Hallie, you can kind of see and feel the vibe there from the California governor of how the Democrats feel tonight after this debate.
I mean, he's happy.
Yeah, to say the least. Yeah.
I watched that interview, Tom. I'm texting with folks in and around the Democratic orbit. Obviously, they are nearly jubilant from that, although I think people understand there's still a long way to go before Election Day. Let me bring back Chuck, Kristen, and Steve Kornacki here. Kornacki, let me get to you, because the macro question, the meta question, do debates matter? Do they move the needle? In a race this close, and we've been saying it, competitive as heck right now, how does this play out with the electorate?
Yeah, see, and this is what I find myself thinking about here. You see how jazzed Democrats are right now. You certainly some things tonight I think Trump's going to take some heat for in the coming days. I want to see what the polls look like just in terms of who won the debate, but I am reminded that in 4 of his previous general election debates, Donald Trump was clobbered in the public opinion polls after those debates. I'm just looking here. These are some of the post-debate margins. He lost by 35 points the first debate in one of the polls in 2016, 23 points, 21 points, 25 points to Joe Biden in the first debate in 2020. And you look at those 2016 numbers, and of course you remember that he won the election. You remember one of the dynamics of that election was he'd have those moments where he would take a hit in the polls. Access Hollywood is one of the ultimate examples here, and it would take about a week's time for everything to cycle back to baseline. So as we absorb the debate, see what those polls say, see what the coverage looks like in the next few days, but I keep that in mind as a possibility that if this is rough for Trump, are we looking up in a week and saying, well, the polls haven't changed that much? Now, the way of turning that around and saying, could it be different this time, would simply be, think back to 2016, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump's opponent, was an extremely familiar political commodity to people. She'd been on the center stage of American politics for a generation. Joe Biden had been the vice president when he's running a 2-term vice president in 2020. Here's Kamala Harris. We talked about this. More than a quarter of voters in that New York Times poll the other day said they needed to know more about her. So is there room for her, if again the post-debate polls break in her favor, if Trump's taking some here, is there room for her to capitalize in ways there weren't necessary for Clinton or even Biden? That's what I'm looking to see.
Kristen, I want to go to you here as we talk numbers. I don't want to be flip about this, but I also don't want to be like too above the thing that is going to be the pop culture moment coming out of tonight, which is, of course, Taylor Swift.
You know, I like to talk about
Listen,
pop
what
culture.
is her impact when she posted to Instagram for people to get involved, to register to vote? 35,000 registrations on vote.org after that. I mean, she's got a platform, she's got an audience, she's got a loyal audience who often listens to what she has to say. I don't want to, again, we're not too, like, you know, we're of the people here. We can talk about it.
But it's a really important point, because young voters were a key part of
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Donald Trump is walking into the spin room here, which is a very interesting moment, very unusual. You know the adage, you see a candidate in spin when they feel like they need to be spinning. Let's listen in for just a second here. I think Garrett Hake is there. I'm not sure if his camera is plugged in and ready to go yet, but let's listen in this impromptu news conference.
Just done.
So come right up here to this mic. Right up here to this mic. How about we do it this way? Ready? Did you lose that debate? Don't push it. Come on, guys. Walked into the spin room here. He's walking here. Mr. Trump, we're live on ABC News here, sir. Mr. Trump. I think he's at the top. Here we go. We thought it was our best debate ever. It was my best debate ever, I think. And we had it was very interesting. It showed how weak they are, how pathetic they are, and what they're doing to destroy our country and the border with foreign trade, with everything. And I think it was the best debate I've ever personally that I've had. We're getting polls that show 92 to 6, 88 to
11. We're having a lot of great polls that just came out. They're polls, I guess, phone polls and lots of other polls, but you see the polls. A very important debate. Now, she wants to do another one because she got beaten tonight, but I don't know if we're going to do another one. I wouldn't mind. The polls are indicating that we got 90%, 60%, 72%, 71%, and 89%. So the polls are very good, but beyond the polls, I felt very good. I had a good time doing it. I hate to speak about our country so negatively, but that's what happened. They've ruined our country. They've destroyed our country. So I hope you're all having a good time, but it was a very interesting evening. Yes.
Mr. President, if you're so confident you won tonight, why are you here? Why not let the performance speak for itself?
Well, I think it did, but people said, would I come here? And I made an obligation to a couple of people that I'm going to do their show. But it was I thought it was a great night.
Mr. President,
yeah, go ahead.
what's your reaction to Taylor Swift's endorsement of Kamala Harris?
I have no idea.
Mr. President, when Republicans are complaining about moderators, does that mean that it wasn't a good night? Were you not prepared?
No, I thought the moderators were very unfair, but it basically was 3-on-1. But I thought they were very unfair, the moderators. Everybody did. But despite that, they're saying that the debate was a big deal.
Were you prepared for that, sir? Were you prepared for that kind of debate?
Yeah, I assume the moderators would be bad because that right there is the worst of all the news networks, in my opinion, and it always has been. Yeah.
Why will you commit to a second debate with Kamala Harris?
Well, she wants a second debate because she lost tonight very badly. So they immediately called for a second debate because they lost. So we'll, think about that. But she immediately called for a second. Look, we're looking at polls. We're looking at polls. The worst poll that we've had was 71 that I see, 71% to like 24 or 25.
Where's the poll?
We'll look at it, but they want a second debate because they lost. I mean, every poll shows they lost, and they lost. Now, with all of that, it was obviously 3-on-1, but I think we did great.
Did she get under your skin, sir?
Thank you. Who are you with? I love this guy, whoever he is. You said you did great. Yeah, Lebanon.
Listen, folks, if you can't tell by the hard-to-hear audio and those shaky camera angles, this was not an expected or planned appearance by former President Trump in that spin room in Philadelphia. He simply showed up. You heard him talk about that. He walked in front of where a number of reporters gathered, including our Garrett Haake. He's walking back over now, a little closer to the microphones, it seems. Let's listen back in for just a sec, see if that's any better.
The vice president, he's, the office of the vice president, and certainly, if you take a look at it, she was terrible with respect to the president. She's trying to get herself away from Biden, and she wasn't able to do that tonight. I think it was a big thing. They wanted to disassociate with Biden, and they weren't able to do it. What do you think of the president? Multiple times. What am I doing? Project 2025. Yeah, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. What do you think of the moderators? I think the moderators were very unfair. I actually thought they were just out.
The migrants.
No, but that's a true story.
President Trump, I'm Yusuf Salaam. One of the
I want to be super transparent with you here. Tough to get our camera closer into this gaggle, into this scrum. Obviously, he travels with Secret Service, the former president. There's a bubble, a bit of a bubble, at least around him. He's walking around talking to people. Tommy, almost while we're watching this, and I want to keep this up in case we get a better angle. There's Andrea Mitchell. Let's listen in for a sec.
I don't even view it as a performance. Our country is in decline. We're a nation in decline. And I thought that we got that out. She was unable to defend it. She was certainly bad on foreign policy. She was very bad on the border. And the polls are showing that I have one poll is 92% to 6. And all of the polls are 60, 70, and 80 in our direction. So I thought it was a great debate from my standpoint.
To Mr. President.
I love black voters. I love them, and they love me too. Oh yeah, it's true. You take a look at it. No, that's true.
It's nonsense.
It's
The local authorities
okay,
say.
well, you could check it out. Check with the authorities. I really don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I just say, all I do is say the truth. I say the truth. If I lose votes or gain votes, I don't care. But this was my best debate. I thought it was very good. I thought she was very weak on foreign policy. She was very weak on the border. And I'm very happy with it.
So former President Trump here holding court in the spin room there in Philly. Tom Yamas is there, and the former president repeatedly describing this as his best debate in his view, despite the fact that, of course, just a couple of months ago, it was the former president's opponent who dropped out of the presidential race altogether because of that debate. And there has been some news made here as former President Trump is declining to commit to a second debate. Tom, I think I have you, as we're taking a look here, former President Trump walking around spin. Give us a sense of the vibe. Where are you in relation to this? I saw Andrea there. I saw Garrett there. This note about the second debate. Kamala Harris's campaign dangled that it seemed as bait. Sure, we want him to do it. We're down to do it. He's declining to take it, it sounds like.
So, Hallie, I'm about 50 feet from where the former president just walked in. It's interesting. This debate might have been 90 minutes, and I think Donald Trump has turned it into like 100, maybe 110-minute debate, but it's all in favor of him those last 10, 15 minutes. We were watching to see where he goes. He says he's made some promises to get on some shows just beyond us are Fox News, and there's obviously other news organizations here. We're going to keep an eye out to see where he's headed. If he pops around here, we're ready to go. We have a microphone ready to talk to him. But he was there taking questions, and as you said, trying to spin the results of this debate. Republicans in a much different mood after this debate than they were in Atlanta. That has been clear from all the reporting we've done, all the conversations I have. I know you've had similar conversations as well. I'm sort of following the crowd and the noise. It sounds like former President Trump is somehow backstage right now. I can actually see through the curtains here. He is walking through backstage, essentially, where the organizers of the debate are hosting this. I think they're going to bring him in onto somewhere. We have no idea where. But in the meantime, Hallie, as we watch out for him, I'm gonna send it back to you, and if we get any updates, I'll let you know what happens.
I know I'll see you in that scrum in probably about 3 minutes from now. Tom, thank you very much. Chuck, let me go to you on this. Are you surprised that Donald Trump showed up after this debate at all? And are you surprised that he's declining to commit to a second debate? And I promise I'm not trying to ask leading questions.
Look, you uttered the rule. Right? When a candidate themselves goes into the spin room, they know they've had a bad night and they're trying to interrupt almost. I know the way Trump thinks on this. He knows he's getting roasted in all the post-debate, so he's trying to sort of interrupt that conversation, interrupt it on all the different networks to try to show some form of strength to his supporters. But this wasn't a good night, and I'm not surprised he hasn't committed to another debate. I don't think these debates aren't good for him. Steve made the point. He's never been seen as winning any of these debates, be him against Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. He's not a likable person during these debates, and that comes through in public opinion. But guess what? He seems to survive these moments because he does have a strong base of support. I don't think he persuaded anybody new to his side. The question is did Kamala Harris persuade anybody to her side? I think she did a great job tonight making this debate about Donald Trump. But I also understand why Kamala Harris wants another debate. I don't think she did enough to explain to voters what she would do as president. I think their strategy was pretty clear. Do whatever you can to goad Trump and showcase his chaos and his crazy. Well, and that's what she did. Yeah. And in that sense, she did a great job of that. It was all counterpunching, right, to borrow the Gavin Newsom boxer metaphors that he was doing. And it was constant. I mean, to the point he even took the inheritance bait that she threw at him, right? Like, made a little shot about the fact that he inherited his wealth, and he had to talk about that, right? Whatever she said about him,
Wharton Business School, Charlottesville, John McCain, your crowd, these things that we know get under his skin.
My dog doesn't chase after that many squirrels, okay? That's how many squirrels he started chasing after.
Well, it's interesting. you told me 4 hours ago, you predicted that she would use the sort of phrase, "You're fired." You got fired by the American people. She sure did, right? And another sort of idea of way that she was baited. Stand by for 1 second. I want to sneak in one more question, but then I want to get to some voters who are standing by for us while they're getting ready. Steve and Kristen, quickly to you here. You know, Steve, you heard the former president talk about sort of how polling has taken a turn for the better for him recently. While he seems to be citing polls that do not meet our NBC News standards, it is accurate to say that this race looks a lot like it did in July. Extremely close. The enthusiasm generated by Kamala Harris taking the top of the ticket for Democrats didn't magically turn into a 17-point lead in the polls. Far from it.
Yeah, and again, it's sort of that pattern we were talking about a few minutes ago, where when he takes a hit in these polls, we've seen this going back to 2016, things do tend to, sort of cycle back to baseline at some point, and that's roughly where it seems to be in the polling right now. I thought one of the interesting things here, just in terms of would the standing of the two candidates change, there was that New York Times Siena poll that asked, do you see the candidates as agents of change, or do you see them, really as the status quo? And it's an outright majority, 55%, who say that Kamala Harris represents more of the same. And one thing that was striking to me, I think it was clearly the Trump campaign's hope and their strategy preferred going into this debate that Trump hammer the point that she's part of an administration right now that's not very popular. And it was 103 minutes into the debate, I noted, when he said that line, "Why hasn't she done it?" And it kind of made me wonder if he had been repeating that all night, thinking about that earlier, to reinforce that perception that she's just the status quo.
Yeah, and she also, towards the end of the debate, gave her big line, which is that I represent the next generation.
That's
I
right, the
represent
case for change.
turning the page. And to Chuck's point, you have to ask if she wants a second debate so that she can hammer that point over and over again and really lay out that case. What will that change look like? And again, I keep going back to this, Hallie. How would a Harris administration be different than a Biden administration if she does represent change? So it will be really fascinating to see whether the Trump campaign decides to actually move forward with this second debate. But again, Trump in the spin room, talking to Andrea, by the way. Andrea
and Garrett heard that first question
Garrett,
in. Yep.
Always getting to the front. Good for them. It just speaks to the fact that, yes, he clearly came off that stage and his allies, his advisors, knew he had been on defense all night
We
long.
can sit here and talk about it all day. Doesn't matter. What matters is what the voters say, right? And that's the most important thing, especially in the critical battleground of Pennsylvania, a great Commonwealth that I know well, and a great county that I know well, which is Bucks County. That's where we find Kate Snow, a place I grew up, Kate, and I know it's one of the swingiest counties in the Philadelphia suburb. I've been fascinated to listen to your conversation with these undecided voters here, given that, as we've been talking about, a small number of them, about 30% nationally, say this debate was going to matter as far as their decision-making process. Tell me everything you're hearing from them.
Oh, gosh, if I could tell you everything, Hallie, it'd take me at least an hour. But I will tell you, we will try to synopsize for you. I've got 3 voters with me. If you saw me earlier tonight, you know that we're at the Churchville Inn. We're in Bucks County, right outside of Philadelphia. And I have with me Lynn Kelleher, who's a registered Republican, Hannah Reid, who's a registered Independent, and Andrew Wallace, who's a registered Democrat, all of whom came into the night saying, you're undecided. You don't know what to do. Even though you're all registered different parties, you're sort of equally undecided. I guess the big question is what changed for you tonight, if anything at all. It sounds to me like, so far, talking to you at length, not very much has changed. Fair? Fair. Not very much has changed. I want to ask the 2 women about abortion rights, because there was a moment in the debate, it came up, and I looked at you, and the 2 of you were leaning forward and looking emotional and very engaged. Hannah, you seemed angry at some of what you heard Donald Trump say about abortion rights.
Absolutely, because he was intentionally sensationalizing and giving false information, essentially disinformation.
You're talking about when he talked about how long states will allow abortions to happen?
Yes, absolutely. There is absolutely no woman who is 9 months pregnant that is walking into a doctor's office and asking for an abortion unless there is a medical unless it's out of medical necessity.
Is that an issue that motivates the 2 of you? Like, is that going to make you want to vote for perhaps Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris?
It's an important factor. There's just so many other things that concern me more. that I can't say that that's my top. That's not my top.
Andrew, you said earlier you don't want to weigh in much on this because you feel like as a man it's not your place. But you did say that you wished that Harris had actually defined her views more.
She was asked by the moderators where she would
draw the line.
Draw the line on what week she would allow an abortion, and she wouldn't answer the question. So I think once a child can live outside the womb, the line starts to turn to something else.
Did you all think, I think in our conversations off camera, you've been saying Harris had a pretty good night, Lynn, you thought?
I thought she had a very good night.
A lot of what she said resonated with you.
Yeah, I thought she was in command. I thought she countered what he had to say without getting too sucked in down the rabbit hole with him. I thought she had a good night.
And yet you told me you're still not 100% sure you would vote for her.
I'm not 100% sure I would vote for her. Do I wish that there was another candidate between these two? I do. I'm not happy with either candidate. That's why this is so hard for me.
And you were vocally, saying, "Oh, come on," when former President Trump would say some things tonight, like when he brought up immigration again and again.
Well, he just talks in extremes. Everything's, everybody knows this. He just talks in such extremes, and I don't believe a lot of what he says.
Andrew, we've been talking about this now for the last hour. You told me you're about 51% Trump, 49% Harris right now after the debate tonight.
Yeah.
Moved a tiny bit for you. Some of the things that former President Trump said tonight seemed, you were nodding along when he talked about the Afghanistan withdrawal, when he talked about crime linked to immigration, I believe, parts of that. And when he talked about paying for surgery for people who are transgender, that was something.
No, not paying for people who are transgender.
You don't.